Welcome, everyone. We know you're still getting settled. We are delighted that you are here with us for our Dean's panel discussion on the COVID-19 crisis, and particularly the challenges and opportunities in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. You will see our panelists here, and they will be introduced in just a second. And while we're waiting for folks to join us, I thought I'd give a quick introduction to the Engineering Dean's Gender Equity Project. My name is Greta Leibniz, and I am the co-PI and project director for the ASEE's Engineering Dean's Gender Equity, or EDGE initiative. I want to briefly share resources that the EDGE initiative team have developed in order to support and encourage deans in their work to accelerate change to promote faculty gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. The first resource I want to share with you is our Engineering Dean's Gender Equity website. All the resources that I talk about today will be located on the website. And of course, I want to point you to the place where you can join the EDGE listserv so that you can receive our most current updates. The second resource we have for you is our Gender Equity Change Checklist, Tools and Evidence-Based Resources. This checklist outlines a process based on the multicultural organizational development model for accelerating gender equity, diversity, and inclusion change. Our third resource is the EDGE Action Steps workshops. In 2019, we hosted a day-long post-EDI Action Steps workshop that was enthusiastically received by about 35 deans. So much so that we were invited to participate in the 2020 EDI. Unfortunately, because COVID-19 hit, that was canceled. However, we're continuing with our virtual Taste of EDGE workshop through the month of May. Our fourth resource is our 2019 EDGE Engineering Deans Survey. Dr. Virginia Valian, an internationally recognized gender equity researcher who led the EDGE research effort, showcased the results of this survey in our first Engineering Dean's Gender Equity webinar, in which she was recognized as the keynote. She found that although deans are very well intentioned and they say they hold their faculty leaders accountable for fostering a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture and climate, deans actually don't collect the data necessary to hold these leaders accountable for change. For example, how can you hold people accountable for equitable teaching and service loads if you don't actually collect the teaching and service load data and analyze it by gender? A key takeaway from this research was that deans needed a tool to help them collect college-level gender diversity, equity, and inclusion information. So we developed our fifth resource, namely the EDGE College Self-Assessment Tool. This self-assessment tool is based on the Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities faculty diversity tool developed by Drs. Griffin and Mabe. And Drs. Griffin and Mabe actually provided our second EDGE Dean's Showcase webinar, where they discussed the foundation of and evidence for their assessment tool. This assessment tool provides opportunity for you to collect not only quantitative but qualitative data and gives you a way to organize the information collected. We encourage the use of the state-of-the-art self-assessment tool, not only because it will help deans be in a better position to understand gender diversity, equity, and inclusion needs of their college, but the data will be useful to help inform grant proposals such as NSF's advanced grants, or to apply for awards such as ASEE's Faculty Diversity Award, or AAAS's National STEM Equity Achievement, or SEE, Change Award. So check out the self-assessment tool. Our sixth resource is the EDGE Elates Fellows and Travel Grants. Drexel's Executive Leadership in Academic Technology, Engineering, and Science, ELATES program, is a national leadership development program designed to advance senior women faculty in academic, engineering, and other STEM disciplines. EDGE partnered with ELATES to establish an early application opportunity for engineering deans during the course of the EDGE grant to develop cohorts of engineering women faculty primed to assume leadership positions. Our specific objective is to help expand and diversify the leadership pipeline within engineering. So, for example, one idea was that deans could use the Edulates Fellow and Travel Grants opportunities as part of succession planning that would support talented women faculty extend their leadership capabilities. And finally, our last resource is the Edge Deans Showcase webinar series. This series was designed to showcase deans who have successfully championed gender diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dean Yannis Yortsos, the Edge Initiative PI, will serve as moderator for our panel today and will introduce our illustrious panelists. So, Dean Yortsos, please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Gretel. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you, wherever you are. It's morning for me here in Los Angeles, and it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you here at this webinar. I am not a quantum physicist, but I understand that in quantum mechanics there is a concept of many worlds. There's a many worlds concept or multiple worlds concept. And I believe that we were living in a previous universe, which then it was completely moved to a universe starting around mid-March. This particular webinar was supposed, in the previous universe, was supposed to happen at the Engineering Deans Institute in Las Vegas. Obviously, it has changed dramatically. And in today's universe, the coronavirus universe in some way has now transitioned into something else, which is actually this particular digital version of the webinar. In all seriousness, this particular crisis provides tremendous challenges in diversity, equity, and inclusion, both for the time that we're going through right now, the time that comes right after this, which is the post-flattening the curve time scale, which is probably for the next, or maybe 8-9 months. And then, of course, the post-coronavirus scale, the post-coronavirus time, where many of the assumptions that we have been making about engineering education may actually be reconsidered and reevaluated. And in fact, that will provide to us the opportunity to think, rethink about many of the assumptions that we're making, not only in engineering education, but also in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So this is an opportunity to perhaps reimagine many things as well. And so just like as we are also grappling right now with the challenges that are facing us in the present and the immediate future, it also gives us an opportunity to think about the future in the long term and potentially reimagine many of the things that will then help us create a better world in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So that's actually an opportunity for us that we should be able to capitalize on. Today's panel has 3 distinguished panelists, and I'd like to introduce them. We have Dean Sharon Walker, who is the Dean of Drexel's College of Engineering. She was appointed there in 2018. Within the first year of her leadership, the College of Engineering received the 2019 Bronze Level Award from the ASEE Diversity Recognition Program. Sharon served as interim dean in the College of Engineering at UC Riverside from 2016 to 2018 before she joined Drexel. She has served as co-PI for NSF Advanced Grant and has been involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion since 2012. She's a fellow of the American Academy Association for the Advancement of Sciences and of the Association of Environmental Engineering and Science Professors. Rudy Buchheit is Professor of Chemical and Materials Engineering and the Dean of the College of Engineering at the University of Kentucky. Prior to his appointment at Kentucky, he was the faculty at the Ohio State University, where he served as chair of Material Science and Engineering, later as Associate Dean for Academic Affairs and Administration. Prior to his appointment at Ohio State, he was a senior member of the technical staff at Sandia. Rudy earned a bachelor's degree at Loyola, University of Maryland, and MS and PhD degrees in material science from University of Virginia. Scott Ashford is the Kearney Dean of Engineering at Oregon State University, and he has been there for 5 years as Dean. During that tenure, he has doubled the number of female faculty, And Oregon State University now ranks number 3rd among all public R1 research universities for the percentage of engineering faculty who are women. In recognition of all his efforts, Dean Ashford was awarded the 2019 Society of Women Engineers Rodney Chip Memorial Award. And OSU, the Oregon State University College of Engineering, was also an exemplary recipient of a Bronze Award in the Diversity Recognition Program of the ASEE. I will start the discussion by providing a few questions to our panelists. Please feel free to enter your comments in the chat. We will address your comments or questions after the panelists have the opportunity to address the 2 or 3 questions that I'm going to ask them. And please refrain on wait until we get to the end of that particular exchange until we start replying to your questions. So my first question to the panelists will be the following. The COVID-19 disruptions are likely to disproportionately affect the careers of female faculty, underrepresented faculty, and disabled faculty, given that women on average take on more household and child rearing duties than men, but also other faculty that fall in the category of diversity, equity, and inclusion may be disproportionately affected. So I would like to ask the panel, what are their thoughts on how this might exacerbate existing inequalities that already exist? And perhaps as a result, have you considered or are making changes in expectations, tenure policies, and or faculty evaluations?
So thank you, Yannis, and thank everybody for coming to the webinar today. So there's a couple things, I think that we're seeing this play out, especially with our dual career couples that we have at Oregon State, many of which have kids at home and are battling, for bandwidth or a quiet place to work. And so I did read in the paper, actually, when this was all beginning, and we were trying to sort out what was an essential need. And I read that one of the universities said that having kids at home was not an essential need to come into the office. And I think one of the things we're doing at Oregon State is we're, as education is a critical function deemed by the governor. And so we are making exceptions to give faculty the time to come in, use their offices in a safe manner with social distancing and proper sterilization, but really being lenient, particularly with our dual career families, access to the office and get that separation, allow them to get some work done. And if you're also looking at some of the changes, and I think many of us have done, we're granting a tenure clock extension for anybody that asks for it, but it's an opt-in, not an opt-out, and I think that's had lots of discussions about that. We landed on a very liberal opt-in, and the other thing is that we are not including at the faculty members' option. We're not including any of the teaching evaluations on performance reviews and tenure reviews for this quarter.
We're following a similar approach. We're also in the quarter system. In fact, we're only in week 5. So this all hit, we were sent home in our final week of instruction, and then we conducted our final exams remotely, had a couple weeks to get our heads wrapped around the new situation and prep for online, and now we're doing a full spring term online. And in fact, we'll be doing a full summer term online because we actually have quite an active summer program. We're really a year-round school because of our co-ops. I bring this up because teaching evaluations are of concern, right? An entire quarter where you're, in some cases, learning on the fly to use Zoom as you're preparing your lecture and trying, with even the best of intentions, to be a good instructor in the online space. People are going to be having challenges, either from just technical challenges, pedagogical risk-taking that might flop. And so we can appreciate that teaching evaluations this year are just ones that we need to take with more than a grain of salt, let's put it that way. We know teaching evaluations are already biased against underrepresented people, and I think this will exacerbate that. So as I look at my faculty's annual reviews, I'm not intending to look at those teaching evaluations, except to find places where students are applauding the faculty members' efforts on their behalf. And I think that's what I'm looking to celebrate from this. We are also doing an opt-in option for a one-year extension for tenure cases, although those files that are due to be in the summer are still moving forward. But the campus is being liberal about this. The thing I liked about it is we were having conversation about tenure clocks, even in our second week working at home. It was never questioned that it would be an issue. And what I was pushing for was us to communicate it to our faculty as soon as possible, just so we could alleviate their anxiety. And because there's so much anxiety around being home, going online, this is one more thing we just wanted to get out there as quickly as possible. So my institution made that decision quite promptly and announced that. I do worry about the impact, particularly on those with children or caregivers. I'll call them caregivers because we have people in our college that are not just caring for their children, caring for other family members, caring for parents right now in ways that are far more than, as Yannis mentioned, in our previous world, our previous normal. And so we have to acknowledge that that's in many cases disproportionately on women. And so I actually have asked my research support staff to do a dive into research proposal submissions, because I'm working on the hypothesis is that we're going to see fewer coming from those that are caregivers right now. And so we can somewhat look at that by a function of years and their position or age and gender. I think it'll be interesting to look at this impact later on. We weren't able to collect the data and do the analysis in time to share it with you all, but I am very interested to see the impact. Anecdotally, there's evidence that women in my own college are managing care more. I'm hearing this from my faculty colleagues, but also women in my other professional circles. I think of one example of a woman who actually is research active, who bought out this quarter to do research, and she's now home caring for her kids while her spouse is teaching his classes online. And I would argue at a research one institution as we are, research and teaching are of equal importance, and yet in that household, the person teaching is taking priority over the person who put their grant money to doing research, and it's really falling on her shoulders. And of course, what's that going to do for her research output for her next promotion? I worry about that. That's just one example of, even in a very progressive household, that I see that burden falling on one person. I love your idea, Scott, about the opportunity to let people use their offices. The challenge we've got in Philadelphia is we're part of the very hard-hit Eastern Seaboard, sort of greater New York. We're still part of the overflow from New York, and so the COVID crisis has really hit us hard. And so Philadelphia, even though the state of Pennsylvania is beginning to open up, Philly we're still a long way off from opening. And so we've been limited by who we can give permissions to. And it's really only research critical from a health and safety point of view. So the luxury of using offices is off the table for us, but I wish we could do it, because that's actually the issue. I know faculty are working in their basements, in their attics, and one faculty member has converted his shed. And I was on a call with him the other day, and his lawnmower was next to him. But he said it's quiet and the Wi-Fi is strong.
Is this perhaps a way to look at this overburdening, sort of the same way we look at service tax? The fact that sometimes women in our colleges, because they're underrepresented in that respect, they're asked to serve on more committees. Maybe one way to look at this is a more general service tax, in this case, service being, for child caring or other cares for the family as well. Rudy, your
sure.
Thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks, Yannis. First of all, let me add my greetings to everybody. It's too bad we couldn't do this face to face. I look forward to the time where we can gather together and have these kinds of conversations. But I think history shows us that health and economic disruptions of this magnitude always create increased differential in privilege where those differences existed before. And there's every reason to think that differential privilege is going to widen in the domains that we're talking about it here. But I would encourage that we don't assume too much, and that we go back to some of the things that Gretel was talking about at the beginning. Use the tools to collect the evidence to find out exactly how differential privilege might be widening. Two reasons for doing that. One, we need to know how to repair things, but we're going to find things that we didn't expect, and let's not forget about that. We're already separated. We don't see each other. It's easy to miss things. So we have to be very deliberate and intentional about collecting the information about how people are trying to organize their lives and manage their responsibilities in multiple domains at the same sort of time. And it's also challenged by the fact that as leaders, our bandwidth is being saturated by now term issues. You have to deal with a budget restructure or a budget cut. You've got to deal with the welfare and the health and the safety of individuals. You've got to be enforcing stay-at-home policies, all that kind of stuff. And so it was very interesting to me that when we cleared off campus and started working on some emergency operations, the kinds of things that we stopped paying attention to. So our diversity committee meetings at the university level and the college levels, they were all taken off the calendar. They went away, right? And so those are the things that we need to guard against. Okay, we've put the patchwork in now, but let's start collecting the information. Let's get this issue back prioritized in our field of vision, because there are going to be things that over time are going to disadvantage individuals. So when this passes and we've forgotten about things, there are going to be holes in people's accomplishments, and we need to be able to account for that and remedy that. I'll say here on the issue of promotion and tenure, I appreciate what the University of Kentucky did. At the institutional level, they automatically extended the tenure clock for every faculty member whose probationary status extends to July 1st, 2021. So that's the vast majority of our assistant professors. So it wasn't an opt-in or an opt-out, you just got it. And that was in addition to any other tenure clock extensions that an individual might have qualified for other qualifying reasons. In the College of Engineering, we have a time limit by which we expect startup funds to be expended. We've extended that by a year commensurate with that. And the other thing that we've done is we've stepped up our formal mentoring operations to provide some security and assurances, particularly for our youngest faculty members who don't have strong familiarity with the budgetary policies and history and culture of this university. They're feeling very, very insecure, but in reality, they shouldn't. They're the future. They're the ones that we're going to work the hardest to protect, and we need to make sure that they hear that and that they believe that. So those are the things that we've been focusing on with them over the past few weeks.
Well, thank you very much, Rudy. I just want to move to a couple of other questions so that because we have such a compressed time today. I want to address a little bit the potential impact of financial budget cuts and the like on initiatives that have been started in many universities for quite a while now, many engineering schools for that matter as well, particularly with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I know that in my own school, we had a very significant effort in that area. My concern or question is, would activities or commitment to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion will continue, or with equal emphasis, as this would be reflected, let's say, in budgets, or be weakened? So I just wanted to ask the panel if they have any thoughts on that. More generally, as I was listening to the conversation, the Engineering Deans Council, which has a diversity committee in it as part of their standing committees, I was wondering whether there is any movement or any positioning from the council in that area as well. I'm not aware of that, but certainly, everyone is trying to do things, address things of the moment, and so hopefully something like this will come up. But anyway, I just want to ask the panel what they think about this, the potential budget, financial issues with respect to priorities, including diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who wants to take it?
I'll go ahead and start. This is something I'm worried about. Just as Rudy mentioned, right, that these meetings just got off the calendars. We've all been in crisis management mode. And I think we, a group of engineering deans and university leaders, have to change that. We have to own it. We have to keep it on our calendar, and we have to continue to elevate it, because frankly, the money's not going to be behind it. So we have to put our political capital behind it. Fortunately, our campus was in the process of hiring its first big, I can't remember the final title we came up with, but it's basically the Grand Poobah of diversity for our campus. First time ever. And I've been on a committee that's been planning for it and doing the search. And even in this financial crisis where pretty much everything's on hold for hiring, faculty and staff, this one's moving forward. So I find that a relief. Now the challenge, of course, is we're going to bring in somebody and they're going to have a much bigger struggle, because I'm sure the budget for that role is going to be much diminished. And so again, this is where we have to use our collective political capital to make sure that this stays on everybody's radar and move forward. All my hiring's on hold right now. I imagine yours is too. My board of trustees just met today to approve the campus plan on how to address the financial shortfall that this has brought, and the potential future shortfall that we're all thinking about, worried about, planning for if fall does not look as we hoped, or next academic year doesn't fall into place as we would hope. And so I'm not sure when I'll be able to hire again. I'm hoping to get a couple in, but you know, the challenge is if we're not hiring or only making a few hires, we have to be just that much more intentional with every hire. And so our strategy in hiring we'll just have to be more explicit. It might, again, take a little more political capital, but if we're only going to hire a handful over the next few years, I want to make sure every hire fits our needs, and keeping diversity as one of the top priorities of all of our campus needs. I think that if anything, this is the time to focus on retention and what we can do to make sure our faculty, all of our faculty, are supported, but particularly those that are often the most vulnerable and don't get the attention or mentoring they need, just to make sure that people can be successful in this sort of uncertain time, and know that the university is doing everything they can to support them. So it'll be an interesting thing, even as the EDGE conversation continues. Maybe the lens will switch. Instead of to recruiting diversity, how do we properly support and retain those people who've been historically underrepresented in our colleges?
So hiring was frozen, faculty hiring was frozen at the University of Kentucky as of March 23rd. That caught us right in the middle. So we had half of our candidates accept offers by that time, but we lost half of our recruiting class this year also. And those candidates have now been released. They're good. So if you want to know who they are, I'll let you know. Fortunately, because we had a focus on diverse hiring, more than half of our incoming class this year will be diverse. More than half was diverse last year. So in terms of the composition of our new faculty, it's been pretty strong. Interestingly, you know, the University of Kentucky, at least on the academic side, absorbed a $73 million reduction in its recurring budget. That for engineering meant about almost a 10% budget cut. There was some very interesting things that were protected in that cut at the university level, which I really appreciate. One was the diversity hiring pool, and this is one-time money that's used to help offset costs, startup costs, or first-year salary costs for diverse faculty hires. So I thought that was a very strong statement in support of diversity. What was also protected, as Sharon was talking about, were funds to combat offer. So essentially counter offer funds. So those were two very strong statements in support of faculty on the one hand, but preserving gains in the diversification of the faculty on the other. So those are very hopeful signs, and we'll be looking to take advantage of that going forward. Next year is going to be a very lean hiring year for us, as I'm sure it will be across the academy. We have some strategic program growth initiatives. We will be looking to support those while at the same time keeping our commitment to diversification of the faculty. So lean times ahead for sure.
Thanks, Rudy. So at Oregon State, we're actually still have several searches going. We're in the weird position of having several, being able to hire, but also kind of doing the other thing with some kind of restructuring of some of our units. And so that's a bit of a challenge. I think that you know, if I look at the how we're able to promote diversity in the hiring process, we're still able to use our search advocate system. I think that is still keeping, you know, trying to minimize implicit bias in the process. We also, well, a lot of the colleges have I think are under more financial stress on campus than we are. So the dual career hiring, partnering with other colleges is getting pretty tight, but we're all talking through it. And in engineering, we have several dual career hires that we're able to follow through with. I think keeping that, and actually less so than the funding, but keeping the waiver, a search process in place during a crisis like this, because it's not all about the money, but it's also the process and making it easy. I think for us, we also have we have an associate dean for faculty advancement. He is really the champion for our goal around our community. And so he is still someone that faculty go to if they're having some issues or some challenges where they might want to have a filter before it gets to me, so he can talk things through without really divulging some of maybe the individual faculty's names or concerns. We also started a Stay-at-Home Heroes Award. What we found is that the university was often coming out with these emails like at 5:05 on Fridays that told, the next step and what we were going to do. So I started trying to preempt that with, we have these stay-at-home heroes where we're acknowledging a handful of faculty and staff each Friday, early afternoon, to try to end the week on a good note, and also just trying to help the community, keep that community going. And I see that for our, I think having the community in place before a crisis like this is really critical. And I've seen that some of our schools, after they had a faculty meeting last week, and then they had an optional garden tour, and they had about 20 or 30 of the faculty and staff stay on, and they all, through Zoom, showed pictures of their garden and what they had planted. And, that is, we all miss each other. And I think, events like that and keeping the community going is one of the biggest things that we can do.
So, Yannis, could I add one thing that I think it's really important for us all to think about? And I worry about our pipeline. We've spent an enormous amount of time trying to grow and diversify our pipeline into the professoriate. And I think we're kind of at a crisis moment of losing them due to this COVID. If we're not able to hire them or even be able to sustain them on our grants, because this is a very difficult time where people's projects are on hold and so on, we could lose a lot of momentum from what we've been working so hard to build. And so I think just sort of a collective call to arms also for all of us to find ways to keep all of our talent, but particularly focusing on mentoring and helping those that are from underrepresented backgrounds stay in the academy with various creative roles, whether it's giving them a little longer till they defend, or postdoc positions, or just allowing them to lecture, just so that we don't put them out into the workforce without options, and then we lose them by the time we can do our hiring again. I think that's something we have to do to make sure that when we can go back to our hiring, we have the pool we need to be able to get back on track for diverse hiring.
That's indeed a very significant point that you make, Sharon. I will just throw one more question, and then we'll open it to answering questions from the audience. And the question I have is, looking to the future, there is clearly the possibility of looking at the opportunities that will allow us to change the conversation in many ways. I'm sure that many of you, just like myself, are involved in a restart project of sorts. How the fall semester will restart, and then what the new normal is going to be. How do we empower? My question will be, how do we empower voices that advance diversity, equity, and inclusion to participate in a significant way in the restart project, as well as a future that we do not know how it's going to be? It may not necessarily be the same as before. Maybe we live in a way that we can take this opportunity to create a better future, in which case all these priorities that we're discussing now can be advanced. Any thoughts in this regard? Should we have a call to action in a different way in which we can engage our engineering community, the ASEE, the Engineering Council, others, to try to come up with ideas on how we can shape a future that, you know, all the things that we care about become organic and become part of the new world in some way.
So if I could jump in, I think that there's something that you just made me think about. In the short term, there's going to be a lot of hardship. At least I'll speak for my own institution. Yep. There's a lot of work about going online. We're going to be doing summer online. We're preparing for the possibility of a hybrid or, you know, fall. And there's so much work in course development, and there's lots of new service that's related to that. And when we think about that service burden that typically falls on our sort of well-intentioned underrepresented folks, we need to be very cautious that as we get into recovery mode, we just don't overly rely on those wonderful committed people that we always do. We have to share the burden and make sure that we're not exacerbating the overassignment of service when we need people the most. So really making sure there's more of a collective action, I think, is really important. Yeah, I think there's sort of a moment of opportunity, though, in higher ed, and maybe this is something we can collectively think about as engineers across the country. I feel like before COVID, we were always trying to get people to realize the relevance of having institutions of higher ed in our communities and in our country. And maybe this is a partisan thing to say, but all of a sudden, higher ed is relevant. You know, the kind of work that's coming out of our universities in the COVID response, from the more, you know, the quick, let's get our, maker spaces making masks and shields, and our engineering colleges contributing to the public health response that way, or this really quick turnaround of research and invention that are coming out of our colleges that are getting a lot of attention. All of a sudden, I think people realize that having scholars in their backyard is important. I actually think this is a chance for us to rebrand, so to speak, engineering, because engineers have really come out in a very big way as being huge contributors to facing COVID. And I think we're going to be even more importantly, we have the potential to be elevated further as we think about what does it mean to reopen society, and all the kinds of technologies and innovation and data management that reopening society will take relies on good engineering and systems design. And so I think that this is maybe where we could collectively work on our own reputation in a way that we were struggling with before.
You know, I think we had been on the slow glide path for a merger between face-to-face instruction and online and remote learning for a long time. I was thinking 5 to 7 years out, but I think over the past 5 to 7 weeks, we've all turned into online experts in some way, shape, or form. So I think we've been released from the classroom to a certain extent. I'm really intrigued with thinking about trying to reach out to place experience. I know that a lot of folks do that anyway, but I just think that our capacity to be much more creative in the teaching and learning process is been shot through the roof. So I think there's going to be huge opportunity for us in that space. This
disruption has I think it's really giving us, the profession an opportunity. You know, if you look at, we're all talking about, really an increased focus on education, right? Because we got to get the education right during this time, right? Because at least for a lot of us, that's what pays the bills, and it's our commitment, right? Part of our mission to the students, while we're keeping our research programs at least going. But I see that there's this shift in the balance, right? Where maybe a greater focus on education, like Rudy says, the online, hybrid, in-person, right? And what we're finding is, I think people are finding what they might do better or what they might prefer. And what I can see coming out of this, for us, it's really this disruption, I think, is going to lead to much more flexible position descriptions, right? So at OSU, everybody's evaluated for tenure, promotion based on their position description. And I can see, and building on what we do now, so the service, that service penalty that you're talking about, Yannis, let's give people if they want to do more service, let them do more service. If they're interested in more online or hybrid, let's let them do that. And I think let people, and I kind of figure out what works for them in their career. And I think we've kind of broken the mold through all this. And I think all of us are going to be much more open to maybe less traditional research, teaching, service, letters of recommendation in the future, and really letting people figure out that, give them that flexibility and how do they want their career to play out.
I agree. At the same time, I think we have to empower our faculty who espouse ideas in the same direction. I see that during this crisis, most of the interesting ideas that I have received have come from people that advance many of these issues. And in some way, we do, as deans, we think we know how to move forward, but I think getting the input from our faculty in that area is very, very important. Also from PhD students as well. I'm talking about students that are in the categories that emphasize diversity and inclusion as well. And so it's something that I am very sensitive about in terms of our own institution, because I hear, whenever I have a town hall with faculty, I think the most interesting and I wouldn't say provocative, but interesting ideas for change come actually from that category of faculty. So that's something that we may want to pay more attention to, and this is certainly something that I try to do as much as I can.
Yannis, I think one of the questions that came up that sort of relates to what you just said, is a nice lead-in, was that how do we make sure that we provide faculty with supports to help create diverse, equitable, inclusive teaching, research mentoring, advising, as well as collegial environments? Because it is very easy for us all to get siloed within our particular spaces, which tend to be occupied by people that are similar to us. And as we want to create diverse environments, how do we foster that space actively?
You're correct. And so I don't have the answer to that other than suggesting that we have to empower these voices to come up. And that's something that, is something that we have to prioritize in many ways. I do get isolated comments and people reach out to me, but I can say that if we systematize it in some way, I think that's an important part. And I look forward actually to do this. I think this webinar will give me the opportunity to do it and create a group of people that can help us reimagine the future in some sense.
So I actually think this is an opportunity for us all to think about shared governance again. I think it's something we often take for granted. And perhaps I'm speaking because I'm originally, previous from the UC system, for which that's a really big value. And I saw how well that worked for people to feel a sense of ownership and inclusiveness. And, at my current institution, there's not as much history with that. And so actually something I'm implementing in the College of Engineering, we've created a staff assembly that never existed before. We've created a student government structure that never existed before, and other committees of representation for faculty. I think that by addressing everybody's sense of access, opportunities for voice in various in process, so that they have a sense of engagement and control of their own career trajectory, I think actually addresses a lot of these issues, but also, and because it makes people feel connected, right, in these kinds of structures. At least when we get back to campus, that'll be really important. In the short term, I think actually I've seen a silver lining with Zoom. I feel that it takes the formality away. I mean, I don't normally wear a blazer anymore at home. I figured with other deans I should, but we're all much more informal. And I feel there's actually opportunities to make the connectedness and make the communities and provide more support for people. And maybe we can do that intentionally now when we're remote and try to find a way to protect that when we come back to campus. And I love the garden tour idea. I'm going to steal that one.
Yeah, I got to say that, wearing a collared shirt, this is about as dressed up as I've gotten in some weeks. So yeah, it's definitely that. But the one thing that occurs to me in this conversation is that we should draw a distinction between, values and mode shifts, right? Our values have not changed here. Our modes of engaging and interacting and teaching and learning and research have all shifted. And it's easy. Those are big things, and it's easy to confuse them with maybe flexibility in our values. So I think the conversations on what you do and how you do it and how we reorganize have to start with, touching and stating your values, because that's, we've spent a lot of time bringing values forwards in organizing our academic structure. So let's not forget those things. They're first and foremost. And I think after that, it would be a little easier to figure out what right and wrong ways are as we pivot into new operational modes.
There were two questions in the chat. One had to do with, I think, sort of a legal question. What happens if faculty say they don't feel comfortable going to the classroom or going back because of feeling vulnerable? And there was another question that had to do with public outreach. I think Virginia asked, can we lobby state and federal politicians to argue for the importance of science?
At Oregon State, anyone that has a, if they are in a high-risk category, then we will accommodate them for working remotely as long as we need to. That's the plan going forward. For people coming back to campus, our current plan is that we're going to have them. We will follow the CDC guidelines, so people will have masks and and social distancing. And I think all of us are going to be lobbying state and federal governments. I think it's going to be a challenge. I think higher ed is has been in the news a lot before this. I think a lot of good news around higher ed over the last few months, which we've talked about a little bit, and that's going to be to our advantage. But there's a lot of competing priorities out there that are going to be and much of our lobbying, I'm afraid, will be to keep us where we are and not maybe lose ground in many of these areas.
I must say that it's the first time an engineering school was asked to rescue the football team at USC rather than the other way around. So that's a good news in some way. What about lobbying to the state and federal politicians? Anyone wants to take this up, particularly for people from state schools like Rudy?
Yeah. So, I was doing some of that over the past 12 hours. And interestingly, our federal relations rep, said, well, the system is slow. Senate just got back. The House hasn't, and so there's lots of attention being given to these big CARES packages and formulating the next one. Lots of discussion about what's going to go in the next CARES package. We're all, of course, very keen to see that there be some support for states because what that means for higher ed for public institutions. But what I got back with very clearly was don't have lofty expectations for using the lobbying process to get great things done. That will not diminish our attempts whatsoever. We will continue to push, but I think there's a lot of uncertainty in Washington right now, and I think that's a pragmatic thing we have to be thinking about.
I know another question that has come through was how will research-intensive institutions balance the emphasis on research and the new demands on online course development? It's very clear how we promote assistant professors, at a research-intensive institution, but now we've got such significant demands on them in terms of taking their courses to online. What implications might that have for P&T?
In the P&T process, at R1 institutions, our research is the foundation of what we do, but it's that foundation for that education mission, which is just as I think as large at our land grants. And so one of the things that we do, in the P&T process is that we use education as it's as important as the research that is going on. And I think that course development, that is something that the faculty is given time to do, and that is something that they can elaborate in their case statement. And it's valued, and part of that is that as you go out for external letters, one of the things that I think we see more and more, right, is that we're not, you know, if you look at getting tenure or promoted, we're not asking if they get promoted somewhere else. We're really looking at the case at this university. And I think that having that balance and having those values of education and research and that balance, I think, is what allows us to take that into account.
I think there's some education that has to happen, though, because the senior colleagues who rose up through the ranks with a different set of criteria, you know, they're usually slower to change on what they think is acceptable for a tenure package. So I think this is where we have to be really clear about what expectations are current and relevant now, and make sure it's documented so that as a faculty member is coming through the ranks, it's unquestionable what are their targets. And I'm not saying bean counting, but I'm saying what's the priorities and how they spend their time. And if any time we needed to make sure there were structures to support junior faculty through mentoring and oversight, this is the time. And my associate dean for faculty affairs is busier than ever, but making sure that we have the structures to support them, I think is going to be increasingly important. I'll tell you, this is you know, in all honesty, this is something I'm struggling with. We only became an R1 institution a year and a half ago. It's something Drexel takes great pride in. We do not want to let that slip. And this is a really hard time because it will slip if we aren't very conscious about continuing to prioritize this. And faculty are not happy about the increased time it takes. And, you know, it's one thing to get through the COVID year, but if this, and I agree with Rudy, this is the new normal, right? We're no longer contained or confined by the classroom. So this is going to be more the case that people will be doing this kind of prep. And trying to educate the faculty that this is part of expectation, and some of the senior faculty to carry more of that burden to protect their junior colleagues is going to be something that we'll have to, as deans, I think that's what we need to do is put in the political capital to make that happen.
I agree 100%, Sharon, with what you said. Let me, I want to just add a little bit of texture to it, if I could, in the context of this mode shift versus value shifts. There is a mistake to be made here. We value quality instructional effort. We value that, and we will reward that. And that's an unshakable value. What's changing is a delivery mode. And the mistake to be made here is to evaluate a new faculty member developing an online course and evaluating that in the context of teaching output that we've come to expect as conditioned by traditional face-to-face instruction, where it's certainly possible to go in with a handful of notes and a great personality and wing a lecture and get your way through a whole semester. You can do that. You cannot do that and have high quality online teaching and learning. So it takes longer to curate that content and produce it, and deliver it, and reinforce it, and work with the students. So young faculty who do that aren't going to be able to teach at the same pace. They're going to maybe accomplish much deeper learning with their students. So we just have to be sensitive to those differences when we get to the point of evaluation, which is going to be a couple of years down the road for the people who are experiencing this now. So I agree 100% with what Sharon's saying.
Some universities like mine do have centralized efforts going on in this direction, which people are dedicated to provide all the technology required in training and various tools as well. So to a certain extent, that alleviates the burden on some of the faculty. Also, you know, the more involved universities have been in the distance learning experiment, the more, you know, the more capable they are. At USC, we have been doing this for a while now, so most of our faculty, you know, handle it pretty adeptly, I think. But definitely there is an issue, there could be an issue in many other places as well. One final point that I wanted to ask is about how we communicate all these, well, good intentions and all this commitment to our constituencies. And I'm not sure that we do a good job overall, particularly with vis-a-vis our PhD students, all these pipeline issues. And I was just wondering if there are any ideas about that, because, you know, it's easy. I mean, people feel anxious. They feel, you know, that the world is no longer, you know, as optimistic or steady state as they expected. And so communication and reassurance is an important part. And so I just wanted to ask to see what you think about this.
Two quick examples from my personal experience over the past few weeks. So yesterday we had a college faculty meeting in this kind of a format. Actually, it was in webinar, but we had 250 attendees, 3 times more than we would ever get for a meeting like that. So that's very interesting. The other thing that I was really kind of resistant to this, but my marketing and communication gang convinced me, it's turned out to be brilliant, is we have, a webinar series, Dean's webinar series. So we feature a cool research idea. Of course, the first one was on how the college was reacting to the crisis, but we're getting over 100 participants for this, every Friday afternoon kind of a thing. So it's a seminar. It's the old-fashioned seminar, just in webinar format. So we're finding some good opportunities to connect that way.
We've done town halls a couple times now, or faculty staff meetings that have been well received and well attended. We've also done a town hall with our graduate students and with our undergraduates. Although I think what we've done with the undergraduates is we've divided them by departments to make it much more specific to the concerns of their majors. And those have all gotten great attendance and brought up issues to our attention that wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done that. You always worry that the moment you open the gates, you don't know what's going to come. But actually, it's been positive. I think people have just appreciated the connecting and appreciated being heard. We've created, we now have a weekly student newsletter and then a faculty staff newsletter that's every other week. But for faculty, we have a Blackboard site where we've created a place to put a repository of all the campus communications, our college communications, all the resources, webinars, because I don't know about you, but we got inundated by well-intentioned emails by the campus. And it became the point that nobody was opening them anymore. You couldn't remember. So this is like a one-stop shop for our faculty and anyone instructing, so it includes our graduate student TAs, to be able to learn all the resources about managing virtually or anything that they may need to know. We've also created a similar site for all of our staff, and that's really been very helpful. And they get all the messaging that also goes to the faculty, because especially like our advisors, our departmental staff, we can't leave them out of the conversation because they're still trying to do their jobs. And they might have normally heard it before at the water cooler or the Keurig machine, but now we need to make sure they know about it. So I think actually our staff communications has been some of the most well-received, and I think that's helpful.
I think we're seeing, like everybody else, better attendance at our meetings than ever, right, by using Zoom. I think just 2 quick points. One, as far as recruiting goes, we're doing much more reaching out either through Zoom or through webinars or through calling, meeting with our ambassadors for our recruiting our students. And I can see that we're not going to go back maybe to completely to how we used to do things. This is, I think, a permanent change for the better. The other thing is for our international students, we are finding opportunities for them to start taking a class, maybe fall quarter, if they're unable to come to campus, to get them to enroll. And we have suites of classes that any of our graduate students could take to try to get them engaged and feel like they're part of the university.
Absolutely. Gretel, I think our time is getting close to the end. You are our timekeeper?
Absolutely. I was just going to pop in, so you beat me to it. I love it.
Before you close me, I just want to make sure that the way I look at all this is looking at, let's say, several months ahead and try to see, looking back several months ahead. If you were to look back on how we reacted, I think we reflect a lot what it is that what is our purpose and our values. I think this is critical test of leadership in many ways as well. And so it's very important to also have that mindset that the way we react now will be evaluated very seriously sometime in the future. And I think it's an opportunity for us to make a difference.
I also know that there were a couple of questions and maybe future questions that arise. Yannis, may I share those with you and to share with the collective so that we can continue the conversation here? Because we've just hit the tip of the iceberg. I know that people are continuing to question how others are working in their own little silos, and it's nice to be able to reach across silos and share our strategies. So just encourage you all as audience and participants in the webinar, feel free to shoot me any questions that you have, and I will pass them on to Yannis and our esteemed colleagues here. In the meantime, go forth, change the world as you're continuing to change the world and do positive things. And we thank you for your time. We realize how valuable it is, especially when it adds one more Zoom meeting to your agenda. So, thank you all, everybody. And we look forward to continuing our conversation.
Lovely to see you all. Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye now.